Hello, hello. It has been quite a while since I've gone live, so I'm hoping this is all working correctly. If anyone is here, I'd love it if you say hello in the chat. Um, and yeah, it's going to be nice to spend a little bit of time with you today, just talking through some questions that I've had recently and just talking a bit about plans for things coming up because life is about to get very busy for me. Um, and yeah, so I am just going to hang about for a little bit before I start answering questions. I've taken a few already from Instagram and from comments that have been submitted. If you have any more questions, please do feel free to add them in the chat because I'd like this to be an interactive thing. And if you have anything you want to ask, either something you've been thinking for a while, or if something comes up that I'm talking about and you'd like to know more about it, then please ask about that. So yeah, it's been a lovely Saturday. No, not Saturday, Friday. I'm losing track of all of the days because I'm about to go on maternity leave in about a week and a half. And so my work schedule is all a bit strange at the moment. So yeah, first thing I will talk about is the fact that my friend Anthea of Forest Flower Knits has just released a matching hat and mitten set, a design she's done using my Mendip 4-ply yarn. It's really pretty. Unfortunately, I don't have samples here to show you. But if you go over on her Instagram or on Ravelry, you can see those there. They're really beautiful, like fairly simple geometric color work. I think quite nice for beginner color work knitters. And I'll talk a bit later about things I particularly like in color work knitting. And yes, so they use my Mendip 4-ply, which is currently on sale because I am trying to clear out as much of my inventory as possible before I go on maternity leave, because I'm also probably going to be moving house quite soon and it's all a bit chaotic. So the more yarn I can send out to lovely people in the world and not have to pack is really, really great. And then, yeah, hopefully, yeah, it'll be a little bit of extra income just to save up before I go on leave. I've just seen Marita's joined. Hiya! It's lovely to see you joining from Norway. Another friend of mine is in Norway at the moment. It's been almost 2 years since I was in Norway, and I would so love to go again, but I suspect with a little one showing up quite soon, it's going to be quite a while before I'm traveling. Hiya, Hilary. So yes, with the hat and mittens that Anthea has designed, I'm just quickly going to show you the color combination that she has used, because it's really fun to see other people's color combinations, because I know that I have a very distinctive color aesthetic. And Anthea has come up with this beautiful combination here. This is coming across a tiny bit cool because of the light I've got here. So these are all on the Mendip 4-ply Sunny base. So this white is the natural undyed colour. And then we've got Coal, which she has used for the main colour in her version. And this one is Sage, which is just a really nice, warm, sort of light to mid green. And Ore, which is a nice sort of bricky orangey red. And then Plum, which is this rich sort of royal purple. We've got someone joining from Alaska. Hello there, Katie. And yes, so I think it's a really fun color combination. If you have any questions about color combinations, any you would particularly like to see, any advice, I always love chatting about colour combinations, so please do ask in the chat there, and I can show you ones from what I have available here. Now, some of my standard colours have sold out already and won't be in stock until sometime late next year. But there's still a good selection left. And if you are wanting to shop any yarn within the next, well, for people watching live, like soon, for people rewatching within 11 days of this video going up, if you just use the code BABY in capital letters when checking out on my website, you'll get 15% off all yarn. Because yes, I'd like to send it out to you. We've got Kat from Heather and Hops joining. Hiya, Kat. Hope you're doing well. So yes, just to reiterate, in case anyone has joined, please do ask questions in the chat if you have any, and I'm going to start answering ones that I have received previously. So first up, I've had quite a few people interested in various sort of what is happening with the channel, with me going on maternity leave, and plans relating to baby and things. So baby is due end of January. I'm going on maternity leave next week. No, week after next. So just before Christmas. And I will be taking probably until at least the middle of next year, so middle of 2022, as leave, partially because I'm also going to be moving house, and the house is likely to require quite a lot of work, which is going to be very interesting with a brand new baby and me trying to work out what to do about that. So that means that I will be taking a break from making videos, which will be a shame because I will miss making videos for you all. There will be one more podcast episode before Christmas. People who have been watching regularly and might have binge watched various of my videos, you're welcome to go back to the beginning and rewatch those. They are not as good quality as the more recent podcast episodes, but I think I've talked about quite a lot of interesting stuff over the sort of 3 and a bit years that I've been making videos. And if you've watched all of them, then my Patreon will be remaining open during my maternity leave. I'm going to be editing the benefits a bit so that people who are already subscribed or anyone subscribing will be completely aware of what they'll be getting, because at the moment there are lots of benefits that won't be continuing while I'm on leave, but there will still be some. So you will still have, if you're one of the tiers that has access to the Patreon exclusive videos, you'll still have access to those while I'm on break. So if you would like more Marina Skua video content, then you can sign up for Patreon. It is a subscription, but you can sign up for a little while and then unsubscribe once you've watched them all if you want to. It's there as an option, and that helps to support me and make sure that I've got a business to come back to. So a few more people joining. We've got Annie, and then a couple more questions there, which I will answer in a second. Marietta is saying I can recommend your Andlang hat. Marietta very kindly translated that one into Norwegian for me. I released it about a year ago now, and it's a really nice geometric colourwork hat, and is one that I used wool that I had been given in Norway, which was really lovely. So a beautiful undyed grey yarn alongside some hand spun leftovers, which I've actually made into quite a few projects. I really like using hand spun yarn as the contrast in a colourwork project alongside commercially spun main yarn. Um, and I find it's a good way to use up little bits of quite special yarn that are probably not going to be enough for a project on their own, but will combine really nicely with something else. Um, doo, doo, doo. Yay. Cool. So I'm going to get onto some questions about not maternity leave stuff. Um, once I go on leave, I will have hopefully a a few weeks before the baby shows up. And so it will be nice to work on some personal projects and some cute little knits. It'd be quite exciting having a winter baby and just having lots of very small things that I can knit quite quickly, but also with the knowledge that they won't necessarily be worn for a long time, because I'm expecting things to be grown out of quite fast. So, Hilary has said, do you use a specific wool wash or can you recommend one? Generally, when washing my knits, I try to avoid using detergent where possible. I tend to do, if I'm just washing things because they need washed, then I will generally give them a soak, because wool, I mean, I knit pretty much almost exclusively with animal fibers, which tend to be antimicrobial, and they are often sort of not quite self-cleaning, but it takes much longer for them to need washing, because they have good temperature regulating properties and all of that. So often I will air things out before I wash them. So most of my jumpers, I might wash like once or twice a year, depending how frequently I wear them, but I will make sure that I hang them up when they're dry and there's a good breeze going, just to air them out a bit. That helps. And then when I will rinse them somewhat frequently. But if they are something like this top and this one that gets sort of quite close to the underarms and I'm not necessarily wearing an underlayer, I will generally use like a generic delicates wash from the supermarket. I know there are lots of ones specifically geared towards knitters or people who do fiber art. I just use a wash that is designed for wool and silk. They're often marketed as just for being for hand washing, and you generally need a tiny amount. And I find that they do the job beautifully. So yeah, but it's quite rare that I use actual detergent for my knits. Exception is if I am using quite minimally processed yarn, and I'm not quite sure how well it's been scoured. If I'm using, small farm yarn that has been to a mill that might not have been fully scoured, which can be quite common, I will often use a detergent when blocking for that, because sometimes you can have just a bit of remaining either spinning oil or residual stuff from the sheep. And it just helps to get rid of that. And Jenna H has said, how do you plan your time generally? You have so many great ideas and interests. How do you keep track of it all? That's very kind. Part of the reason that I wanted to run my own business is that I have always been quite frenetic in terms of making things with my hands. I have always made things, and I first started selling things online. I started making jewelry, and I started selling things just because I was making too much for my own personal use, and that is sort of how things started. I am really grateful now with the way I have things set up that my primary income is selling my hand-dyed yarn. And then I've got the knitwear design, but also creating videos here for YouTube, and the ones that I put on Patreon mean that I can allow a little bit more time towards projects that I find interesting but aren't necessarily things that I would sell. So I've shared things like my hand spinning. It's not worth it for me to sell hand spun yarn because it's almost impossible to get a fair amount for the time spent. But if I can help share that knowledge, and sort of the process that goes into it and how I choose to make things for people who are interested in that, then that's a nice way of doing things for me. Like, obviously, it doesn't make I have to prioritize things slightly in terms of what is actually going to make sure the bills are paid. Um, Personal projects that I share online, um, there is some income associated with that in terms of money from Patreon, which I'm eternally grateful for, and the fairly meager income from YouTube videos. And so prioritizing those things is sort of how I manage my time. So there will be things like pattern releases and specific events and shows and things that have an actual deadline on them, whether it's one that I've created or an external one. And so those things get prioritized. So I will pretty much always have a running to-do list of the actual business essential things that have to happen and when those things need to happen. And making sure that I'm generally on top of all of my admin, and that if I've got things that I am signed up to do every month, like creating a Patreon video or organizing a Zoom call with people, that I'm prioritizing those things. And then after that, everything else sort of slots around it. And I make sure that, like, I don't do well with a very strict routine. So I make sure that I have a lot of, I don't want to call it free time because it's not free time, but it is time that doesn't have specific work allocated to it. And then I can work on what I choose to in that time. So yes, I hope that answers that. I do tend to like to approach things in a fairly free-form way, partly because I don't like feeling obligated to do everything. It's a personality thing. And I just like to make sure that it feels like each day I'm making choices about the things I want to do. And that's what keeps me excited about my work. Boo, boo, boo. So Annie has said, looking at your ironwork tee made me think of this question. Interested to hear about makes of yours whose place in your life has shifted as you wear them over time. Have some become unexpected favourites? Oh, that's a fun one. Okay, so this is the ironwork tee. I've put it here to remind me because one of the questions I got was, what is it? What's the pattern? Because I wore it yesterday and it was in a photo I was in. So this is the ironwork tee, which is a pattern by my lovely friend Diana Waller, who is Paper Tiger Knits. I made this one in handspun yarn that I made specifically for this pattern. As in, I knew that I wanted to knit it and I wanted to spin yarn to make it from. And I really love it. It's particularly nice now that it sits just above where my rapidly increasing bump comes out from. So yes, regarding makes that have sort of shifted in their place, I guess, in my wardrobe and how I wear them, this one is actually a really surprising one. So this one is Galdor, which I released in the summer. So we've got a wider sort of half-length sleeve, no buttons or anything. I'm actually going to take it off because I'm very warm. And this one was done in collaboration with Emma of Woolly Mammoth Fibres. So these are 3 of her limited edition yarns, some of which she has repeated since, as in spun wool from the same flock to the same spec, but in different batches. And it was in response to a call for submissions she put together about the arts and crafts movement and how it was influenced by medieval design, which I thought was fascinating, and it's something that I find really interesting. And so we've got these bits of colour work which are inspired by those things. And it was something that I had quite a clear idea of what I wanted to do when I was sketching for the design. And this touches on something that I will be talking about in a bit about my design process. And so I had this really clear mental image of how I wanted it to look. I did my sketch and everything, but doing it, I didn't see it as being something that I would get huge amounts of wear out of. Like, it filled a gap in my wardrobe that I didn't really have anything else I would wear in that situation. And like, I don't design or make things I don't ever expect to wear. Like, that's nonsense. I spend a long time picking projects based on things that I think fit my style and that I would enjoy wearing. But I have enjoyed this one so much. It's a really useful layering piece. It's so easy to wear. It's quite loose fitting because you've got the loose sleeves, so it'll fit on top of quite a few layers, but it also is not like really oversized or anything. It doesn't look baggy. I think it's just a really nice silhouette, and so I have ended up wearing this one way more than I ever expected to, which is lovely, I say as I take it off and put it aside. But there have been a few things like that. This one is another one I released this year. This is a Dryopterus top, and it feels unusual to have a sort of summery top in pure wool, but this has been really nice. Like, it's not great for the warmest of days, but it's again really versatile in terms of what I can wear it with. It's just got a nice little detail that comes down the side here and is also on the back. And yeah, it's super versatile, and you wouldn't necessarily expect that being sleeveless but also being made of wool would be a really handy thing, but I love this combination as well. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Annie. I'll see if I can think of any more examples. And I tend to prefer knitting jumpers, so pullovers, because I enjoy knitting them more. But recently it has become really apparent that I love wearing cardigans but don't actually have that many. So I am going to be prioritizing knitting cardigans and have been doing so sort of recently. But yeah, it's all about where things fit into my wardrobe and circumstances in life, because cardigans are going to become very useful once the fact that I can't wear a lot of my jumpers because I've got some things in the way. And cool, yeah. So Jenna has said, you inspired me to make ivy baskets last winter when I was trying to clear some from my grandmother's house and still learning. That's loads of fun. Like, I love the fact that ivy is, at least in this country, is something that you kind of can't over harvest. Like, with so much foraging related stuff, you need to be careful that you're not picking too much, that you're not taking away a natural resource, and damaging what's there. But ivy is just so abundant. Same with nettles and brambles. there's just so much growing untended in this country where it is not wanted. It's a really nice material to use. And at the moment, I'm making a basket from garlic stalks. So I tend to grow quite a large crop of garlic each year. And I saved up the stalks when I cleaned and processed them, and am now making them into nice little coiled baskets. And yeah, it's a fun process. I really just like using those materials that are just there anyway. Shona Monroe says, are there any sheep breeds you haven't but want to knit? I was talking with Johnny of Garthenor about this the other day because he keeps raving about Hebridean. Garthenor are using quite a lot of Hebridean in various blends at the moment, and I think it is beautiful with the really dark colour, but it's still one that I haven't worked with at all. And you might have gathered that recently I'm really enjoying the natural undyed shades, and I think Hebridean is a beautiful one. So it is something that once I'm back to, well, once I've worked through my yarn stash and fibre stash, because I have a fair bit of spinning to get on with, I would really like to try Hebridean. But there are so many that I haven't worked with that I really would like to. I'd say there are quite a few breeds that I'm really familiar with because I've worked with them a lot. Things like Shetland and Blue-faced Leicester and Romney. I'd say those are the main ones. And then there are loads of other ones, and I'd really like to do a bit more breed experimentation. But yes, everything in its time. And he's asking, do they smell like garlic? I'm assuming that's the basket. Once they're dried out, no. But when you're making them and when they're still, because you soak the stems so that they're nice and malleable to twist into baskets. And when that is drying, then yes, it smells quite a lot of garlic. Cool. So I have a few more questions written down here. So I got a few asking generally about my design process, which is something I particularly love. I really, really like knit design. I think you'll hear from a lot of knitwear designers that they have far more ideas than they can ever bring into fruition. So I have quite a lot. My desk is covered in pieces of paper like this. That I told you I like designing jumpers. So they're all just scrap bits of paper that sometimes I'll be scribbling for a purpose, and sometimes it'll be for a specific call for submissions or something. And so the way I approach it depends quite a lot on what I'm doing the design for. Like if it's in collaboration with a specific yarn company, then it might be that I have the yarn to start with, and often just a skein, and we'll do lots of swatches to see what sort of stitch designs it's going to lend itself to, what sort of constructions, because some yarns will be more structured, some will have better stitch definition, some are more suitable for something a bit more drapey. And so I'll take all of those things into consideration when coming up with designs for those. I'll often try out quite a few different stitch patterns. At that stage, I will generally go through and do a big page of sketches like that. Then I'll often pick one or a couple, depending on how it's working, to submit, and so refine that idea a bit more fully. And then usually it's a case of doing quite a lot of maths before starting the actual sample. So I'll do a swatch to make sure that all of the gauge is correct. You will hear, like, for my personal knitting, I don't swatch nearly as much as I do for my design work, because for my personal knitting, I can sort of wing it and I can usually make it work. Whereas for design work, the gauge is so crucial in terms of being able to make sure that the sizing is going to fit, that I'm going to be able to grade it properly for all of the sizes. And so all of the measurements in the pattern are based off the gauge that you're getting. So at that stage, it's usually start doing a lot of spreadsheets. In the last podcast episode, I mentioned a bit that it used to be that I would start with the size that I was going to make and do all of the relevant numbers for that size. And then once I was finished with it, I would do the grading for all of the other sizes. But now I grade everything out from the beginning. So as I do the calculations to go along and make the sample, I mean, like with this one, for example, you've got a split hem. So I knew the total I needed here. So then divide for the hem. So get the total number of stitches for each hem section. And then make sure that I've calculated out the right amount for the side panels. And at that point, I would use those numbers till I get to about here. And then is at the point where I need to start thinking about armhole shaping. So I will work out the decreases I need to do to make the armhole fit. And so I'll do the next, and then the neckline and everything. So I don't do all of the numbers related to the pattern right from the start. I will do it incrementally, but I will do everything before I actually knit it, rather than do it as I go along, hope that I'm keeping adequate notes, and then try to work out what I did afterwards, which I think is a common way of designing that I get quite lost with. And I think working like that means that it's going to be much harder to write up a cohesive and correct pattern. So yes, once I've got all of the numbers done and I've got the sample made, I will usually send it to my tech editor. There can be a bit of a wait because a good tech editor tends to have quite a long lead time. They're usually quite busy. And yeah, once the tech editor's finished with it, I'll push it out for test knitting. Again, this is mostly for garments. Accessories tend to be a bit simpler. Things like hats, I have been known to knit it on the Saturday and release the pattern on the Monday because I am confident enough in my pattern writing and methods and everything that that this is only for things where I am quite confident and don't need to rely on a tech editor and test knitters. But for anything where I'm doing something at all unfamiliar or with slightly more complex instructions, they will go through a tech editor and test knitters. And then it's a case of getting the pattern together. I do my own layout, which I'm not the best at. I think you can probably tell from my patterns that I have a background in business to business magazines, which is not the most like riveting thing. So I'd like to make my patterns a little bit prettier, but they are very functional, and I hope they are easy to follow. And then there's lots of setup on Ravelry and my website and everything. And yeah, I think that's the overall process. So also my process, the design process itself depends quite a lot on what I'm making. A color work pattern, I will usually do the chart before anything else. So often, like I just have loads of square paper notebooks that I treat like coloring books that I can just make up as I go along. So I will draw colour work charts in those. And so I have dozens, hundreds of colour work charts that have never been knitted. And if I do a chart that I really like, I will then consider what yarn it would be suitable for. And then I will, well, then I'll see what I think it would fit on. Some things I specifically do thinking this is going to be a hat or this is going to be a yoke. Then again, swatching colour work designs, especially for yokes, I will usually make some tweaks once I've done the swatch. Just especially if it's one where I'm doing quite a lot of interlocking flowing lines and stuff, which I really, really love doing. Once those are knitted up, it looks quite different to how it looks on squared paper. And so I will often make just a few tweaks of like, actually this stitch should be this color instead of this color. And that is how that works. Yeah, so it's a lot of sketching and scribbling and playing and swatching and having fun. And again, there's a lot of stuff that I've put work into that never actually becomes a thing because I can't possibly do all of them. There aren't enough hours in the day or days in the year. But yes, the things that do actually make it to being published have had so many hours, often weeks or months of work into them, which is why I, even not out of self-interest, this is why I think that knitting patterns on the whole are often too cheap. I think mine, I've tried to price fairly so that they're not off-puttingly expensive, but also I don't lose all of my money in fees, because if you see a hat pattern that's £3.50, I will probably end up getting maybe about £2.30 of that between things like PayPal fees and Ravelry fees, and stuff like that. So just, yeah, something to be aware of if you weren't already. And yes, if anyone has any more questions about design process, it's something I love to talk about, so please do. Kat is saying real life elven brogue when it comes to knitting and releases. Yes. As I said about how I approach my working day and a routine, I don't like to have everything 100% planned out all the time, because it's just the quickest way to suck the enjoyment out of what I'm doing. And I love my work and I want to carry on loving my work. So someone has asked, my knitting, English throw style, has tight gauge. Any tips on making gauge looser? That is a very interesting question. And I think a lot of knitters at some point have been through the stage where they were probably quite a tight knitter. I remember when I was first starting out learning to knit, I was a very tight knitter, and you have to do the thing where you really try hard to push the needle in the stitches and it's all miserable. And I think I loosened up naturally, so I ended up being quite a loose knitter, and now I think I've generally sort of averaged out. So depending, if you are a beginner knitter, then it's quite possible that your gauge will sort of sort itself out on its own as you get used to it. If it's something that you've been knitting for years and you're still a very tight knitter, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being a tight knitter for things like projects where you want a dense gauge. That's great. If you're making a lot of socks, that's fantastic, because for socks you want as dense a gauge as you can possibly get for nice hard wearing fabric. But if it's something that you would like to even out, or if it's bothering your hands, because tight knitting can often cause hand problems, which I have experienced in the past, mostly because I'm just very hypermobile and I don't have particularly good like ligaments and stuff. Um, I would say that rather than just thinking about your knitting technique and what you can do with the stitches, think about your whole body as you're knitting. So a lot of the time, if you've got tension in your stitches, that might be coming from your shoulders. Because if you're sitting like this, sort of, I do it all the time. I realize that it's like, I am enjoying myself. I am doing some pleasant knitting, and yet I'm sitting like this. And it's like, just relax, chill. It's something that's enjoyable. So take the stress out of your shoulders, take the stress out of your forearms. Try and keep those things loose, and just I think a lot of the tension in stitches comes through from physical tension. That's my take on it. Might not be 100% correlated with how it works for everyone, but I'd consider just working on relaxing your body. And Kat, who is Heather and Hops Knitting, who is watching now, has a fantastic video called Yoga for Knitters. It's a super easy, accessible video. It's quite short. It's great for little breaks in between your knitting. You can do it sitting down on a sofa. And it's something that if I'm knitting for long periods of time for a sample for a design or something, I will watch that a couple of times a week and just make sure that I'm doing those exercises just to loosen up and look after my body. Because it's something that if you're knitting for long periods of time, you do need to consider. So I hope that is helpful for the person who asked that. And yes, conversely, if you're asking about how to make your knitting tighter, I don't know. Just try and pull the yarn tighter. Because my knit stitches, my gauge is pretty good, but my purl stitches are quite loose. So I will often, if I'm knitting flat in stockinette, I will often have my working needle on the knit side, so the one that for me is on my right hand. When I'm knitting, that one will be larger than the one on the left hand. So when I swap round, my working needle, so the one in the right hand, is a bit smaller. And so as I'm making the purl stitches, they roughly even out. And that is a personal workaround, just to try and get more even stockinette, because I don't like the little ridges that you can get from uneven knit and purl tension. But yes, if anyone else has any tips there, I'd love to hear them. Thistle and Doug says, can you explain how you went about sourcing your fleeces for your yarn? Knocking on farm doors has only yielded a few Jacobs and Tunis for my personal spinning. I can't imagine that on a large scale. Okay, yes, that's quite an interesting one. So my main wool supplier is a farm called Fernhill Farm, and I got in with them when I started spinning, and I was looking on the internet for where I could buy local fleece. And that basically happened because they had fleeces listed online that I could buy without having to call someone. I know I do YouTube videos and I'm quite comfortable talking to a somewhat large group of people I don't necessarily know, but I don't like phone calls. In some ways, I'm really quite introverted. And so the idea of not having to call someone was fantastic. So I ordered a fleece from Fernhill Fibre. It showed up on my doorstep and I started processing and spinning it. And it sort of just went from there. So I started just spinning that fleece that I had bought for myself. I then sent photo of the yarn that I had spun to Jen at the farm, just as a kind of, here's some of the yarn I've made from your wool. I hope you like it. And I didn't hear from them for ages because it was lambing season, which I hadn't even considered. And Jen got back to me, asked if I wanted to do some commission dyeing for them. So I did a little bit of dyeing of their wool. And so I started out, when I started dyeing yarn to sell, I was getting it from a British wholesaler called World of Wool. I highly recommend them if you want to get breed-specific yarns at a fairly reasonable rate. They have lots of non-British wool too. They have a massive selection. They're open for retail customers as well as trade. And that's how I got into that. And then I wanted to start doing things more traceably. So I wanted to work with fibre from farms that I knew. And I had already worked quite a lot with wool from Fernhill Fibre, and I love everything that they do on the farm with regards to how, I talked about it probably quite a lot over the years, but how they approach their animal husbandry and the fact that they see themselves as guardians of their land, and they are trying to use the animals and the land in a mutually beneficial way. They're trying to regenerate the soil that they're working on, and work just in a very holistic way, which is something that I really appreciate and very much ties into what I'm interested in promoting with my business. And so it was sort of luck that I fell in with them, and the fact that they were proactive about having an online presence. Since then, I have my alpaca bases from a local alpaca farm that I actually went to visit today to drop off something I had knitted for them. And that was through like just work, a chain of work people. So I knew someone who knew someone who knew someone, and eventually worked through that chain and ended up getting in contact with them, and they have the most beautiful alpaca fiber. And so I think being at local shows, if you've got a show local to you, I can imagine that it's easier in the UK to find stuff that is local, just because everything is so much closer together than in, for example, the States or Canada. And yes, so I have had a few things that, like, I did have another yarn that I was potentially going to be in the works this year, and I had to put off, and I might do in the future with a new farm, which was again through a friend works at a nursery, and the nursery is on a farm, a child nursery, not a plant nursery. And they had some beautiful sheep. I happened to pick some of the wool off a barbed wire fence, and while we were walking around just seeing what the nursery was going to be like and what the setup was, because it's like a forest school, and so there are nice woodland walks and things. I was just twiddling it and making yarn, sort of how you would make cordage, so just twisting it and then twisting it back on itself. And it turned out the wool was actually really nice, so she put me in contact with the farmer, and then yeah, that was going to be a thing. But when you're pregnant, you're not meant to be around ewes and lambs, because of various diseases that can be passed on. And it meant that I wouldn't be like, I'm lucky with Fernhill that they do their own wool handling, and I pay a bit more, but it means that I don't need to skirt the fleeces myself. But I have worked for them previously skirting fleeces. With this, I would have had to skirt the fleeces myself, and it wouldn't have been safe for me to do so. So that's something that hopefully I'll be doing more in the future. And yeah, I think it can be difficult. I also think Instagram can be a useful way of connecting with people. I know Instagram can get bad rap, but I've found so many people with fairly local flocks that I would love to work with. Like that, there are far more farms local to me that I would love to work with than I can possibly buy wool from and turn into yarn. Um, so yeah, I think it sounds like you're doing the right thing, and just sort of keeping an open mind about it, looking out for people who might be wanting to shift some fleece. Like in this country, most farmers aren't farming for wool and probably just want to get rid of their fleece. That's the reality of it, and I hope that is changing a bit. But yes, and Shona is saying yes, that's helpful. Thank you. Oh, okay. I think this is about the tension. Funnily enough, my new skill I want to learn is socks. This has encouraged me to use my new woolly mammoth fibre Wensleydale sock wool. Lovely. I love Emma's yarn. It's fantastic. She is so Emma of Woolly Mammoth Fibres is a fantastic example of someone who is sourcing local wool, often by just asking people in her village who the sheep in that field belong to. And yeah, she's a great example of having materials that are available locally and having them turned into beautiful, beautiful yarn. And yeah. So yes, sock knitting. I mean, I hate sock knitting. It's taken me a while to come to terms with this because I really like hand knitted socks, but I find them really uncomfortable to knit. Like deliberately having to knit tightly is quite hard on my wrists, and so I do it in small stints. Method I prefer for doing things like house socks, or really thick socks for like wearing with wellies and things, is to make socks much bigger and then shrink them. So knit them at a normal gauge. This tends to work with heavier weight wool, so like probably DK and upwards. Knit with a heavier wool at like a normal comfortable gauge, but at a bigger size than you want the finished socks to be, and then hand felt them, which makes for a like really warm, dense, comfy fabric. This Lundug is saying, spun the tunis and was planning on dropping off a skein to the farm. At present, they're using it for insulation. Yep, that's the thing. I mean, at least it's being used for insulation. It is being put to a use rather than being buried or burned. I'd actually love to try tunis because I don't know if there's any of it in this country, but it's, am I right in thinking it's a quite nice sort of foxy reddish brown colour? But yeah, it's one that sounds fascinating to me. Yes, and hello Fran, lovely to have you join. Yes, so I've been talking for like almost an hour now. Does anyone have any more questions? So I've talked a bit about what is going to be happening. Only the lambs are reddish. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, it's also very interesting to see like how wool changes both throughout the year and throughout the life of the animal, because often like a sheep that looks almost light brown in a field, that's just the very tips of the fleece. If it's got a really thick fleece, those are the bits that the sun touches, and so they get dried out and sort of frazzled by the sun, so they get bleached, and then underneath is often a really nice dark brown, and then adults of the tunas are pure white. That's really interesting. Cool. Yes, as I said, there are so many breeds that I would really love to try working with. And if anyone wants to know more about different breeds, like I am far from an expert, um, I tend to be quite familiar with the ones that there are lots of local to me and that I've worked with. But the Fleece and Fibre Source book is a massive tome. It's about that thick, and it has so many different sheep breeds. It has really good examples of what the lock structure looks like if they're sheep that have different fleece qualities. So, for example, Icelandic sheep that have a dual coat, so they have a really long, quite hair-like fibre and then a fluffy undercoat. Um, It'll show you examples of both of those, and will give little samples of how yarn looks from that wool spun up, and often there's a little knitted sample. And it just has lots of interesting information about the breeds, but from a fibre point of view. So yeah, highly recommend the Fleece and Fibre Source book. It's really, really interesting, even if you're not a spinner or anything. Like, even just as a knitter, knowing the qualities of the breeds that you might be using, if you're using breed specific yarn, it can be quite a nice way to know more about what the yarn might be well suited for. Annie is saying, are there any personal projects that you're looking forward to that are not necessarily for design output? Do you get to knit or spin purely for fun? I do try to make sure that I have personal projects on the go. This one is one from last year. Did I make that last year? This year? I don't know. Time has no meaning anymore. I do like to knit projects that are just for me. They usually take much lower priority, so they take much longer, because I'll work on them in the background, and then design work takes precedence. So if I've got something that is commissioned for a magazine, I will work pretty monogamously on that thing, and then come back to the personal projects afterwards. So there are a few things that I've talked about on the podcast, which are in progress, but very much in the background. So I'm looking forward to getting to finish those things. And then I've got, I'll just get it a second. Everything is chaos in here. This is one skein of 3. And I've talked about this yarn quite a lot. It's impossible to capture this color, and I don't even know how to describe it. It's like pink, but also brown, but also kind of beigey grey, and it's got quite a lot of yellow and orange in it. It's loads of fun. So this one I'm going to be knitting into a cardigan to fill the gap in my wardrobe for comfy cardigans. I spent a long time trying to work out what I'm going to knit, because I had quite a few boxes that I wanted to tick with what I was going to knit with it. So I'm pretty much definitely settled on a pattern by Irene Lynn, which is called the Gown card. I think it's just called Gown. And most of the versions, I think the original sample and a lot of the versions on Ravelry are actually a sort of knee length, sort of duster type cardigan. It's worked top down seamlessly, which means that I will do my usual thing of do the sleeves first and then just see how much yarn I have, and probably just keep knitting until I run out of yarn on the body. So it's got nice bits of cables coming down the front here, and then it's got quite wide sleeves. Doesn't have buttonholes, but I will probably make button loops just to be able to close it if I want to. So that is something that I'm really looking forward to making, that I've been looking forward to for quite a while, because I finished this yarn few months ago. So my personal projects do definitely take much longer to decide on, especially as I often make yarn and then work out what I'm going to do with it rather than something like that, which was quite rare in the fact that it's like, I want to knit this pattern and I am going to spin the yarn to do so. So a lot of my personal projects are hand spun yarn because I have quite a big fiber stash. And yeah, I find it a lot more difficult to design using hand spun yarn. Sorry, I'm slightly distracted. I'm being kicked. um, yes, it's difficult to design with hand spun yarn just because it means that it is inviting a lot more questions about substitutions. And for people who don't spin and don't want to purchase hand spun yarn because of, well, I don't think purchasing large amounts of hand spun yarn is particularly accessible for many people. Yeah, it just makes the substitution question a bit more complicated. So yes, there is that one, which I'm really looking forward to doing for me. I have no idea how long that's going to take me or even when I'll start, but I have now finished my final bit of work knitting, so it might be that I cast that one on fairly soon. And I'll also be making quite a few things for the baby because cute tiny knits. And yes, Hilary says, is there anything you would like to design a pattern for that haven't yet, or something that's at the top of your to-do list? I would really like to, I have in the back of my mind the beginnings of an idea for a saddle shoulder cardigan that I have yarn for, that I haven't done any sketches for or anything yet. I mean, some things I won't even do the sketching stage because I just know what I want it to look like, and I will just, yeah. So sketching is usually either if I'm responding to something specific, or if I need to work out details in my head and how they fit together. But this one, I'd really like a saddle shoulder cardigan, because I love a saddle shoulder. I think they're underrated. And I would like it to have some seed stitch and potentially some simple cables, but I'm not sure. I would really like to design a cabled cardigan with like loads of cables, like big and heavy and warm. That is something that I'd really like to do. And yeah, I'm just trying to think. I don't think I've actually designed any garments that have any proper cables on them at all. That needs to be rectified, because I like cables. I don't like having to pay really close attention all the time to a cable pattern. I like stitch patterns that are slightly more intuitive. And yes, so I think I would like to design my perfect chunky cabled cardigan, and a lightweight saddle shoulder cardigan. I think those two are things that I would have next on my list. I'd also like more cardigans. I'd also like to do an all over colorwork one, drop shoulder. All of these would be V-neck because I don't believe in crew neck cardigans. Yeah, all over colorwork is something that I really want to do. Lots of people saying nice things about the gown cardigan. It's a really pretty pattern. It is not, I mean, with my patterns, I try to be as size inclusive as possible, and so I tend to include a really large range of sizes, and I usually like to support that in other designers. So I will say that that pattern is lovely and beautiful. It's not great in terms of sizing inclusivity. But I know that I'm going to have to do some maths anyway, because there is no way I'm getting the specified gauge with this yarn. So I'm going to have to do some calculations. Even when working from other people's patterns, I can't let myself just pick it up and do it. And he's saying, I remember you posting an Instagram story of working on the ironwork tee outside while snowing. Yeah, that one was, yeah, that was really nice because it was when it had just started snowing here, and so you've got all of the snow sitting on the grass, which was pretty much exactly this color, and then this sort of, again, color that I can't describe, kind of pinky brown thing, is like the color of all of the plants because pretty much everything in my garden dies in the winter. And yeah, it was just a really nice, striking matching of the color combination. So yes, I was probably working on that last winter. But yes, love a saddle shoulder. Yeah, saddle shoulders are great. You tend to see them a lot more on men's cardigans and jumpers. Like I wear, when I'm not wearing hand knits, just like around the house and stuff, I tend to wear a lot of men's like plain wool jumpers that I get from charity shops, and will often slightly shrink down to my size, but they're still really like baggy and comfy. And you see saddle shoulders a lot in those, and I guess it's because the shape, in case anyone isn't familiar with a saddle shoulder, where a raglan, you have the sleeve joining on and you have a diagonal line straight to the underarm, or sometimes you have a bit of a curved line. Modern raglans tend to be a bit better fitted, a bit closer fitted and more contoured, so you'll often have a bit of a curved line. That's working towards a saddle shoulder, where a saddle shoulder, it will go across, and so you'll have the same number of stitches along the top of the shoulder, and then you'll get increases coming down diagonally that way. So it's sort of a very similar construction to a raglan, but you just distribute the increases, if you're working top down, differently. So you do most of the increases for the body first, and then the increases for the sleeves afterwards. But yes, so because of the way they fit, they tend to make your shoulders look a bit broader, which apparently is something that is quite sought after in men's designs, but not as much in things designed for female presenting people. But I have really, really narrow shoulders, and I love a saddle shoulder. So yes. Are there any more questions? Because I'm having loads of fun hanging out with you. But yes, I've got quite a few projects in mind. I will, just while I'm waiting to see if anyone has any more questions to come through, I will remind you that sale on my website for all yarn at the moment, 15% off, just with the code BABY in capital letters. Because yeah, I will be making space and funds for my baby. Yeah, and the fewer things that I have to pack up, like this room is absolute chaos, and I'm going to have to start packing at some point soon, but we still don't know when we're going to be moving, so it's all a bit up in the air. And so yes, the less stuff I have to pack up, the better. Hilary is saying, what's your first pattern that you had published in a magazine? Oh, that's a fun one. Okay, so the first pattern I ever had published was actually the first pattern I ever wrote up, which was a scarf for Quince & Co. And they did a collection of scarves. I think it was published in 2016, so I was, no, maybe it was beginning of 2017, so I was working on it in 2016. So that was a fun, very textured, cable-y, but not a traditional cable scarf. I'm very glad I started with a scarf because it taught me a lot about the process. And I think had I started with a garment, I probably would have been slightly overwhelmed by what was expected of me. Um, like I really appreciate publishers who give a lot of information upfront about what is expected of the designer, because expectations and standards and processes and everything can vary massively between publishers. So the more information there is available upfront, the better. And I'm trying to think the first magazine, because that one was a digital collection. And I'm just going to quickly have a look because I don't remember off the top of my head, which I probably should, but it was a few years ago now. Um, it might have been one for making stories. I'm trying to think. Actually, no, my first garment design I had published was for Knit Now, and that was a jumper called Hexangle, which is a pattern that I really, really like and might make another version of because it, it's a really fun stitch pattern, again, including some slightly non-traditional cabling. It had sort of elongated hexagons, like interlocking on the body with bits of ribbing, and a fairly deep V-neck and a drop shoulder. Um, and it's a really nice pattern, but I gave the sample to my aunt because it was in pink superwash yarn, which just isn't something I particularly enjoy. But I had knitted some of it at my aunt's house, and she really liked it when I was knitting it. So when I got it back, I gave it to her. But I would love to make another one of those, but using wool that is, well, yarn that is slightly more to my taste. Baedeker scarf. Yes, that is the one. That's the one that was published in Quince and Co. Scarves. I think it's called Scarves, etc. 6, 7. Don't remember which one it was, but I'm not sure if they still do it, but they used to do a regular collection of like scarf and shawl patterns. And yes, that was a nice, gentle introduction to the world of having things published in publications rather than self-publishing. And I worked with Quince on that one before I ever published anything myself, which was interesting and informative. And yes, I would encourage anyone who wants to design things and have them published or publish them themselves to give it a go. I'm probably won't have time today, but always happy to talk about sort of specific things about getting into publishing. I'm always keen to encourage people, if you have ideas for designs, to get them out there. But I do think doing it to as high a standard as you possibly can. And yeah, make it, there's a difference between, you know, coming up with a thing that you have made that isn't according to someone else's instructions, and then putting your notes out in the world, to having that and publishing a full knitting pattern that is high quality and easy to follow and clear and all of that. That sounds like a weird distinction. I think I have come across quite a few people not trusting indie designed patterns because they think, well, just anyone can do that, and there's no barrier to entry. Anyone can just put something up on Ravelry, which I think is great. I think that's a fantastic thing. but it also means there's no sort of guarantee of quality, and so there are patterns out there that are very difficult to follow and not necessarily correct, don't necessarily include all the steps you need to follow, or assume a lot of knowledge, or are just what the designer wrote down as they were knitting a thing. And I think if that's a free pattern, then fine. But if you're charging for that, I I think there should be a bit of pressure to do better. I think if you're charging for something, you should be working to make it as good as you possibly can. And I know that my patterns aren't necessarily flawless. Um, we all get errata sometimes, but it's a case of trying to make everything as good and clear and as helpful as possible. Um, so yes, yeah, I'm gonna do one more round of any more questions, and otherwise I will go and probably have some dinner. And then I will be filming at some point, probably next week, for my final podcast of the year, and probably then for at least 6 months. That's one of the questions I keep getting. When am I coming back from maternity leave? I don't know. So yes, I'm going to play it by ear. I will still be hanging around on Instagram. I technically won't be allowed to work because of conditions of like self-employed maternity leave and stuff. I will get a few days that I am allowed to work throughout my maternity leave, so I'm not disappearing completely. I'll still be chilling on Instagram, possibly not posting as frequently, but I will be sharing stuff about personal projects and things because I like doing that. It's fun. And yes, I'm just going to be taking the time to make sure that I can focus on looking after the Bab properly and hopefully settling into new house whenever that happens. And then getting everything sorted so that I can run the business properly and efficiently from there. And when I do come back, as I said, that I will be working one-off days, which will be days that I will, check my emails because I'm not going to be checking them otherwise because admin. Yeah, I'll be taking care of my emails probably about once a month, and doing various bits and pieces of like, I'm not promising to not work on any designs. I would like to have some designs that I can get published towards the end of next year. So although like I'll just be stacking together lots and lots of spreadsheet work on those days that I am working, but I'm not going to hold myself to any particularly high expectations. And I will be communicating when I'm going to be back. The newsletter is definitely the best place to find out about that because that is where I will be sending updates on when I'll be coming back to work and things like when I'll be opening the shop again. So the yarn shop, I won't be selling yarn anymore while I'm on break, although, yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to have to put all of this stuff in storage for at least a short period of time. So yes, I won't be having anything available on the shop that requires me packing physical orders, but things like gift cards and knitting patterns will still be available on the website throughout my leave. So those will still be available. And so yeah, I don't have any more questions there. So I will say it has been lovely to chat to you all. Thank you everyone who's been active in the chat there. It's been really nice to talk to you. I hope you have enjoyed this. And yeah, I'll see you in a video sometime within the next couple of weeks. Thank you everyone for your lovely well wishes. It's really, really kind. So I will say bye-bye for now.